it's because politics and ideology have too often trumped our progress that we're in the situation that we're in. For decades, Washington's been trapped in the same stale debates that have paralyzed progress and perpetuated our educational decline.
And the issue of bilingual education has become one of those perpetual political debates. Hello, I'm Ray Suarez. Welcome to this new edition of Destination Casa Blanca. More than 30 years after its implementation, the debate over bilingual education continues. What are the best policies for English language learners? Advocates of bilingual education, which provides instruction in both English and the child's native language, argue that research backs up this program with findings of stronger achievement gains compared with English immersion classrooms. But opponents argue that data show English immersion, the near exclusive use of English in content instruction, is a better choice, and that there are several problems with the bilingual program, including substandard teaching and children who stay too long in the program. Now officials want to leave the choice to parents, enrolling their children in either one of these programs or in English as a second language classes. How can they decide which one is the best? Joining me, Randi Weingarten, president of the more than 1.4 million member American Federation of Teachers. She's been involved in every major AFT policy initiative of the last decade and has been president of the United Federation of Teachers, AFT Local 2, since 1998. Don Soifer, executive vice president of the Lexington Insitute. He's published research and articles on a wide range of U.S. domestic public policy topics and runs the Institute's education program. Beatriz Bibi-Otero, founder, president, and CEO of Centronia, an award-winning educational organization that provides bilingual, multicultural education. She's a highly recognized community leader and activist and the recipient of numerous awards. And Ronald Blackburn, president and CEO of Aspira, an organization that addresses the high Hispanic dropout rate. He's a longtime advocate for Hispanic education and access to technology. Welcome to all of you. Bibi-Otero, before bilingual education was an established strategy, an established technique, what did we do? Immersion on the fly, sort of make it up as each kid came into the schools?
Absolutely. I think that even from personal experience, I can say that when you landed in a school in 4th grade, 5th grade, not speaking the language, the teacher had to figure out a way to support you. Often our children were being put into special education because it was felt that not having English, not speaking English was a deficit. And that rather than taking the strengths of having your heritage language, your home language, as a tool to help you learn the second language, it was really seen as a deficit. And teachers were having to cope in some way in their classrooms, and our children were losing out.
We're now living through an era of high immigration, but we've lived through them before. Randi Weingarten, you come out of the New York area where they had handled large inflows of immigrant children for decades, and they didn't use bilingual ed as a strategy with the Ellis Island generation, did they?
Look, I think that, and thankfully, our thinking about all of this has evolved because, you know, you had with kids and you also had it with teachers. With teachers you had, okay, just throw them the keys and let them do it. With kids it was the same thing. You know, they'll tough it out. So just put them in a class and let them tough it out. And I think what we've started to learn, it took us a long time, the loud decision was a critical piece of this, is that we actually have to support kids. We have to support teachers in raising achievement for kids, and which means we have to make sure that they have the tools, conditions to do that. But we have to actually support kids and take them where they are, not where you want them to be. And ultimately, even though I don't think the school systems around the country do it as well as they should do it, and I think that we're seeing that because the Hispanic dropout rate is still far too high, that the issue of whether or not you have bilingual education, the issue of whether or not you deal directly with the needs of English language learners is now not disputed.
Don Soifer, what do we know about earlier immigrant flows compared to the approach that you might take with a structured bilingual transitional program?
Well, these observations are absolutely right. We have had a real evolution, but we also know that lack of English proficiency costs the United States economy $65 billion a year in lost wages, and that comes down hardest on Latinos and Spanish speakers. Kids typically graduate or move to English proficiency at a rate of less than 10% of the year, so that Latino kids in many American urban school districts are much more likely to drop out of school than to ever become proficient in English.
But the old approach, do we have an assessment that gives us something to work with that compares the old approach of throwing them in the deep end of the pool until they learn how to swim versus a structured approach from day one that says, I'm going to move you over time from speaking just Spanish to speaking 2 languages?
I think what we're seeing is that many of the different approaches are all getting better. We know a lot more about how most effectively to teach a child a second language, how the ways that can be done, and the ways to support a teacher to do that. We have some school districts have had some real success using structured immersion programs that are not the farthest thing from sink or swim. They're well designed, well implemented, well supported programs that are achieving success much more than throwing a kid into a classroom and making them learn by watching. Likewise, some of the transitional bilingual education programs there are some remarkable programs, particularly in some charter schools, that are having the same and really impressive results with the same demographics of kids, using a range of different ways that are research-based and supported by a number of valuable resources and research that are starting to show real results, as long as those results and the results for each individual kid remain important.
Ron Blackburn, how has the landscape changed since your organization, Aspira, went to court to fight for bilingual ed?
Well, I think there are 2 things that have happened. One is that we have gotten much better at developing effective bilingual education programs, and of course the school districts are more inclined to provide the resources and try and get the teachers to be able to have effective programs. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, as you mentioned before, we have a huge immigration of, particularly from Central and South America, in major cities and even not in major cities around the country, and many school districts are struggling. Just this morning, it was announced for the first time, the state of Virginia was the first state to be able to track students from the 9th grade to the 12th grade, and 20% of the the LEP students, limited English proficient students, had a 20% dropout rate. Now, that means to me that Virginia, as a state, which is receiving large numbers of recent immigrants, isn't prepared to address the needs of those kids.
Let's talk a little bit about places that have a historic mission of turning kids into Americans, and places for whom this is a new experience. There's probably a teacher standing up in front of a class in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where 20 out of the 25 kids in the class are in some part of the journey from Spanish to English, and a generation ago this would have been unthinkable in Arkansas, in Lumberton, North Carolina, in Huntsville, Alabama. Are those places handling it differently, Don, from places like New York and Los Angeles and Miami?
Well, there are a great many school districts that are coping with educational challenges that didn't exist 10 years ago. One place where I think this is particularly interesting is Chicagoland and the suburbs of Chicago, where you have large Spanish-speaking populations where you just didn't 10 years ago. Now, Chicago has a state law that mandates bilingual education. And as resourceful and thoughtful and conscientious educators look for the best program to meet those kids' educational needs, sometimes those programs come into conflict with the state mandate, to the point where one of the most highly effective school districts in Chicago, Diamond Lake, had their funding threatened last year because while they were achieving some of the best results in the state with a really innovative program that gave kids a choice of different approaches and some real good, thoughtful programs and strategies and support for teachers. But they had their funding cut because they didn't meet the state's bilingual education mandate, and we have a situation where school districts and states need to rethink their programs to meet those evolving educational needs.